Welcome, everyone. I'm Michael McCarthy, your blockchain instructor. This is another part of our expert blockchain interview series. And I'd like to welcome David Treat, who is the global blockchain lead at Accenture. David, welcome.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So, David, we love to teach the blockchain course as realistically as possible. Could you share with us, what does Accenture do in the blockchain space, just to get us started?
Sure. So if you had asked us what our corporate strategy was a decade ago, we would have boldly said that we were the fast follower company that once a technology reaches a point where it needs to scale, we were the company, right? And we took things to scale. Our CEO, Pierre Nantamru, who recently passed, changed that strategy about 6 years ago to say, actually, if we're not making markets on the cutting edge of innovation and technology, we're going to just have our business start to atrophy because of the pace of change and the pace of innovation. And so we again 6-7 years ago started a construct where we've have our labs infrastructure that's existed forever that does primary R&D, where we have the latest and greatest in new tech percolate, and we do patents and innovation, and we play with it in a non-client setting, no non-revenue generating, not client facing, pure R&D. And so blockchain was in the labs for this past 6 or 8 years, and percolated for a while. And about 5 years ago, it started to become started to get interesting. And then 4 years ago, it got really interesting and relevant for our clients. And as a signal and a structure within the firm, we then create what's called a strategic growth initiative when we really feel it's time to bring it to clients. And so I and a guy named Simon Whitehouse were tapped to build Accenture's blockchain business starting about 4 years ago. We are not a product company. We're fully a services company. So our whole focus is on building deep alliance relationships with the leading product and platform providers, and then using our deep client and industry expertise to really understand what our clients need to achieve, the outcomes, the transformation that they want to achieve, and lead from that perspective, and then think about how enabling technologies and innovative technologies like blockchain or others in combinations can help them. So we have, at this point, we've made massive investments in building out our own internal capabilities, massive investments in our alliance relationships with the key technology providers and platform providers. And then we've been working to create consortiums, drive real projects and programs in the industry, and continue to help the technology evolve. So, I guess just one last thing as a part of it, just in terms of who we are. We were a founding member of the Linux Hyperledger project, and I sit on the board. We are a founding member of the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, and I sit on that board. We're part of a public-private partnership called ID 2020, focusing on the identity space, because identity is at the heart of all of this. Part of the Chamber of Digital Commerce, starting to really engage with the regulatory and the legal and the political community around it, and part of things like the Global Business Blockchain Council, right through the standards and regulatory bodies. I have members of my team sitting on ISO TC 307. We work with NIST, we work with everyone. So our whole goal is to basically be part of the fabric of how the technology is being developed, as well as that was the poor choice of words in this context. How the technology is evolving, as well as how the functional business consortium are evolving, and the like. But at the end of it, clients at the heart of it, real business value transformation at the heart of it, enabled by key tools like distributed ledger technology and blockchain.
So I'm talking to the right guy. That's excellent. So as far as today's concern, blockchain's pretty fast moving. What's doing well in blockchain? Like, who's doing well in this space? What are the industries and sectors that you like?
Yeah, so financial services obviously got out first fastest, right? And at this point, they still comprise roughly 70% of our portfolio. But from a pace of engagement perspective, we're now seeing supply chain both in the physical and digital realm. So physical supply chain, easy to wrap your head around. Digital supply chain, not always easy to wrap your head around in terms of how you get from an artist to a music track to a retail customer. And then identity. So those are our three focal areas where we see the most engagement the most traction, engagement, real things happening, and they're leading the waves. There's a little bit of I smirk a little bit when I say that those are our three focus areas, because you also can adopt the mindset that every organization has a supply chain. So that kind of brings everyone into scope. And every organization, has deals with identity of their customers, employees, vendors, et cetera. So while I say we're focusing on three things, really, financial services markets infrastructure is a real focused thing. Supply chain and identity is having us really start to engage across our entire client base.
And do you have clients that are actually making money with blockchain initiatives now?
Clients making money, it's really important to understand where we are in the cycle, because there is wild hype and just wild misrepresentation of what's going on. My perspective on it is the only organization on the planet that has decided to actually apply this technology at the heart of their infrastructure, right, which I really hold as the measure of when you're truly starting to play in a production environment, is the Australian Securities Exchange. I actually had Peter Heim, the deputy CEO, on stage with me this week at an event we were hosting, and we've got a very close relationship with them. They're the only organization that has made that very difficult choice of saying, we're modernizing a core part of our infrastructure. For them, it's the equities clearing platform for the country of Australia. Their current system's at end of life. They were forced to modernize, and he and his board, went through all of the process to say, if we're going to modernize, we're going to do it on the most modern constructs to be, and have this investment last as long as possible. They're the first. They have just gotten to the point where they've opened up the first availability to developers. Their developer environment just opened up to the participants in their community to start to hook up and play with it. They're going to start their industry-wide testing, I think, in 9 or 10 months, and they're going to do a year's worth of testing. At the end of the day, we are at the beginning of this entire cycle right now. This is not, anything that you've heard about that's in production or using production data is a small part of the organization that's either a new product or service, or something that it has a set of characteristics where if it fails, it won't take the organization down. If Peter and team fail, there is the beating heart of the infrastructure. So okay. I really credit them with being out first and fastest. And at the end of the day, it's important to understand that we're at the very beginning of this cycle and really just starting to get started. If I give one other example, of something real happening, we're also about to go live this summer with it was formerly known as the Risk Block Alliance. It is now called the Risk Stream Collaborative. It's a bit of a mouthful, but it's some phenomenal work that was driven by the Risk Institutes of the United States in the U.S. Risk Institutes in the U.S. They are arguably the most successful, or one of the most successful ecosystems of groups of peers that have gotten together so far in this space. They're going to go live this summer with two use cases in the personal auto space. Insurance space. So it's first notice of loss and proof of insurance, right? So you and I smash our cars together. Today it's this dance of paperwork and faxes and emails and messaging between your insurance company, my insurance company, their adjuster, my adjuster, mechanic, police, police department for the report, et cetera. They're going to go live this summer. We've been building the technical infrastructure for them, and it's the first of 20 serious use cases that they've put effort into, and behind which there's 100 additional use cases that are being developed. Again, we're at the beginning of a cycle. The thing that's really interesting about that one, though, is that they cover over 65% of the members comprise more than 65% of the North American insurance industry. So this is an example where you've got the network effect going in scale, and that's going to move, much more quickly, and going into production, officially in early summer.
Okay, so we have two things that are for real. Yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
Congratulations on that. Let's go back to the Australian exchange. Once it's up and running and all the bugs are out of it, how is life going to be better and different for the end user? What are they going to see?
Yeah, so it's always important. It's interesting, right? The initial wave of this technology is aiming at our systems of record, right? This is not about systems of engagement. It's systems of record. It's the messaging models between the participants in an ecosystem where where the biggest benefit will arise. It's not, it's not something that I'm going to be able to turn to my grandmother and say, hey, now you can see blockchain, right? In many instances where some of the most transformative applications of this technology will happen, the end user, the individual, will never know it's blockchain, right? Unless we market it as such and they understand it, because just because of the nature of what it is. It's about about the nonsense of messaging models that pervade our systems of integration, so our systems of record today. So it's important to understand who the customers are in the Australian Securities Exchange ecosystem context. It is the clearing participants, the whole sell side banks, the large wholesale capital markets players that need to do all of the post-trade settlement of the buying and selling of equities. So it will be transparent to an end individual. If you and I are, in Sydney decide that we want to, I want to sell 100 Accenture shares, I'll deal with my broker the way I deal with them today, and my order may get executed. My order will be executed very differently, but it will be transparent to me as an individual. To the clients of the exchange, what it means is that today it's all predicated on massive amounts of messaging and reconciliation to be able to know that I've put in a bulk order for 10,000 shares of Accenture, and I have an expectation that it closed at a price. I have to confirm that the other side of the trade knows the same thing, and it's sent back and forth. There can be in the capital markets post-trade settlement process, there could be more than a dozen messages back and forth of let's confirm price, quantity, dates, and it's a huge waste of time and efficiency. And of course, the more messaging you have, the more the more trade breaks you have, because the data gets out of sync, and that then requires someone to research it and fix it, and then have everyone agree to the fix. And this is the silliness that we've been living in capital markets, because in effect, when we went from paper stock certificates to electronic, dematerialized, we basically just electronified the analog process, digitized the analog process. And that's, we can talk a little bit more about. Our whole goal is to convince our clients not to simply digitize the analog process. I'll come back to that. So very long-winded way of answering your question, that what the participants will experience is, if I know that I see what you see, as we're trying to settle an obligation to sell a set of securities for a price, if you and I know confidently that we see the same thing, we don't have to reconcile. We have less, don't have to reconcile, don't have to confirm, much more confident around the data quality, fewer trade breaks, and our operational costs will go down dramatically as the base case. The second benefit will be that now suddenly we can get creative around the settlement windows. Most of the capital markets industry works on a T+2 basis, right? So trade date today, or you take 2 days to do all of this messaging and reconciliation. And candidly, in the capital markets industry, you've bought something you can't afford, so you have to find a way to finance it, or you've sold something you don't have and you got to go find it, right? This is the basis of our system. You have 2 days to do that. Tomorrow, because of this notion of I see what you see, we'll be able to have the notion of dynamic settlement windows. If I want to pay a different price to get my money faster, maybe I can do that. If I want to pay because I want a longer period of time to compress my trading activity, all of my buys and sells, if I'm a market maker and I don't want to outlay all the capital to do all of those buys and sells individually, and I want a longer window of time to settle, I can do that. And I can pay differently for that and have these dynamic settlement windows instead of the two polar extremes, which, T+2 or instant settlement. Neither of those are good. We want that flexibility to be able to meet the market demands.
So you could go between T+0 and T+5.
Yeah, I don't think anyone wants. I think going beyond. I think honestly, my personal opinion is it should be either. It's zero. It's instant DVP, delivery versus payment, or a number of hours. I think anything beyond a number of hours, you gets into into the silly. But yes, that's the construct.
So your fluid dynamic range is between 0 and hours now, not 0 and days.
That's what it should be. And frankly, the exchanges have these capabilities today. I had Rob Plotnick from the DTC on with me yesterday. You know, the DTCC set in the U.S. context, they settle thousands of trades every day and it's an exception, but they have the capability to do daily settlement. They can do hours today. It's just that the industry construct is geared around T+2 because of the regulatory standards and the current practices. So this is not a foreign concept. I think the demand will grow for it, and I think the whole notion of risk pricing settlement windows will be a really interesting new product that comes out of this, or feature, if you will, or et cetera. There is a third benefit, which in hindsight snuck up on us. It should have been obvious, or it's obvious now in hindsight,
Right.
and it's playing into other efforts. Obviously, when you're putting ecosystem partners into a shared data construct, into a shared business logic construct, that's inevitable if you're gonna use blockchain or DLT. It's a very standardizing. It drives standardization, because if you and I are going to participate in the same business flow off of the same smart contract or in the same DLT platform, we have to agree to how that business works. And so, large parts of the capital markets industry are highly standardized, right? The equities business flow is enormously standardized, highly commoditized, low margin, huge volume. There are aspects of it that, financial services, that are not highly bespoke products, OTC products, et cetera, where you kind of make it up. I'm using extremes now, but we could comprise a very unique bespoke deal between the two of us, and that has the very heavy operational load. This whole notion of moving more and more to a standardized structure, I think, is going to increase the pace of how products mature, but importantly, the ability for the system to absorb regulatory change will be huge. We've spent trillions and trillions since the financial crisis, and billions before that, to be able to absorb reg change, because the way the reg change works is the regulators come up with a change, and then every bank individually has to read it, learn it, understand it, code it, test it, retest it, show it to the regulator, get feedback, test it again, and every bank's doing that individually. Well, if we're in a shared data construct on shared business logic and a shared view of the world, the ability for that ecosystem operator, or the owners of defining that business logic, to absorb the reg change once, allow the regulator to engage with a single entity serving the entire community to test it, confirm it, we may be able to dramatically improve the pace and reduce the cost, and increase even the security and standardization of reg change in a better way, because we have this standardizing effect within an ecosystem.
That is an interesting one. So it seems like governance almost sort of like naturally pops out of this.
It's really one of the most interesting misunderstood aspects of people who, parts of the community that have really been huge sources of innovation, but who've come at this from a technical perspective without the industry depth. They're coming up a hard learning curve around this particular point itself, the whole governance and decision making and risk management, risk mitigation aspects of what the systems that we need, how the systems need to be able to behave at a financial services ecosystem wide level. If you and I are just doing bilateral trades of something, and it's akin to the lemonade stand, we're just exchanging cash, I'm making change for a $20 bill. Bilateral is easy, and this is enormously compelling, and this whole innovation space has been born out of this notion of a bilateral world and bilateral capabilities. What we're seeing now is a dynamic, is all of that original exuberance, and you could almost argue populist notion of let's disintermediate everyone. In financial services, we've gotten away, we finally moved past, maybe a year and a half ago, the disintermediation is the heart of this thing, because people have realized that that's actually not what you want. And you've seen that reflective in the cryptocurrency community, where they're now recreating those valuable intermediary functions, and we're now finally in a space where most everyone is still in the mindset of it's about dramatically changing the role of intermediaries. But it's not about removing them, because then you're removing key aspects of what we all actually need and want. Is that intuitively obvious? Or I do one click more?
Well, it is interesting that in our students, they love the disintermediation and, the anarchy and get rid of the government part. And what's really interesting is they got their way in the beginning. And now you start to see, you're going to miss me when I'm gone.
You're gonna miss me when I'm gone. And actually, it's more the realization of that's not what you really want, right? So you saw it in the cryptocurrency community of, I want to be able to let's not have a bank. Let's just you and I be able to move value between each other. But then I wanted to find the other side of the trade. I couldn't find a buyer for the amounts that I wanted or the thing that I wanted. So actually, we have to recreate an exchange. So let's not create a bunch of exchanges as an intermediary function. I want an exchange to find the other side of my transaction. And then, of course, we're still embroiled in the period of exchanges getting hacked. I'm losing my stuff. I don't know how to manage a wallet. I'm not sure. So custody has then become a huge issue of who's going to provide custody of my stuff, because I'm tired of losing it, or I'm really fearful of losing it. And right. So, now there's this big scramble to recreate the notion of custody. So we have exchanges, now we have custody coming in, and now we've got some really interesting stuff around insurance, right? So a couple of startups now saying, can we provide an insurance mechanism for it? So we have, every bit of, fun in this whole space. You have those that were coming out of that bilateral, really innovative, creative space, recreating the intermediary functions that they thought that they wanted to get rid of. So, we play on both sides. We obviously have a huge commitment to helping in the, the entrepreneurial startup community. But one of the roles that we're playing is actually being purveyors of, or providing that trusted advisor role of, we know exactly what the key corporate enterprise requirements are. Mm-hmm. And we are articulating them. We're using them to help our corporate enterprise clients, be able to filter through the noise and be able to focus on what's valuable. And we're helping the startup community be able to develop faster, better things that will actually be practically implementable by understanding what those requirements are.
So you bring us some really interesting points that if you're going to get into the blockchain space, you have to get outside of your little lemonade stand and look at the entire industry, government, regulation, governance, and be able to see the whole picture and then design for that.
Yes. And and it's really easy to code for the happy path. If you that is not that, it's fun, right? And you can kind of, I've had some phenomenal experiences with some great developers who said, I can code the notion of the end-to-end mortgage industry in a couple hours, watch. And they kind of go away and then they come back and they show me a set of code, and I'm like, that's fantastic. You haven't accounted for it all about when it goes wrong. And then that's kind of, the heads like, what do you mean? I'm like, the entire industry, you could argue the whole notion of governance and corporate enterprise constructs is not designed for happy path. Happy path is easy. Yes. Designed for how to fix it when it goes wrong, how to have the adult in the room, the circuit breakers in the systems. We inherently as humans will never be able to write perfect code. And what do you do when that perfect code doesn't actually isn't perfect?
So that leads me to my next question. We love our startups and entrepreneurship, and that's where we do a lot of our teaching with the innovation. So let's say that someone has a really great idea, and let's just assume that we have unlimited budgets, so that part's out of the way. And yeah, that takes care of your thing. Just send me the bill; it doesn't matter. So they've got a great idea, but they're really not sure what to do. What services can Accenture provide to kind of hold people's hands along the way? A lot of people have heard of Accenture, but they don't really know specifically what do you do. So let's say I come to you with a cool idea. How can you help me?
We do this constantly. Actually, one of my other jobs is I run something called the FinTech Innovation Lab in New York, where we engage in pre-Series A, very early startups to help them, advance their businesses. And as part of that, we actually have 44 of the largest banks in New York City providing mentorship and guidance as part of the program. So we have a huge focus on engaging with the startup community, and we do this all the time, and have mechanisms to do it. But the advice that I give constantly is, the tech is cool, the tech is engaging. It's never about the tech. It is always about, have you zeroed in on an actual business problem with real value? And if you have, and you can articulate that problem and the value that you could create, and how at a conceptual level you're trying to drive that change, we can, we and others, there's a huge community that can have the tech roll in behind it to be able to then, help figure out the how. But if you haven't got the business value and focus and that part of it nailed down, you're going to spin for a while. And so that's where we focus first. Even engaging with with huge, huge companies that we work with as clients, we often have to pull them back from, I want to do the blockchain project. And one of my opening lines in these dialogues is always, I have the role of global blockchain lead. I probably spend 40% of my time stopping people from doing the blockchain project because it is a pointless blockchain project. Yeah. Let's not talk about blockchain. Let's talk about, I don't want to sell you the blockchain project. I'm very wary of someone labeling something as the blockchain project, because at the end of the day, blockchain is a huge, leap forward in our, in the relational database world we've been living in for so long. It is hugely innovative in that it unlocks a different way for companies to work together, and it breaks through the boundaries between companies. And I want people to think about that first. The boundaries from one company to another, the business flow that goes between them, and the redundant siloed nature of the data that they hoard behind those firewalls today. What does it mean from a business perspective if you were to actually punch through those firewalls and confidently share access to data across organizations? And let's have a day-long session about the business flow and the business value and not use the word blockchain. And then once we know what you want to do, then we'll go really deep on the tech and tell you exactly how it'll help. But my best guidance is, if you can articulate the business problem and the business value, you are on high ground. If you are starting your discussions with people about how cool the tech is, you've got a harder road ahead of you.
Excellent. And you just gave me a total layup for my final question. Every student that comes through our classes, about half of their grade is their final project.
Okay, cool.
And so they're always looking for an idea. And we just share with them, come up with a problem and have blockchain be the only solution where you have to have it. If you were a student in our class and you were tossing out ideas, where do you think people should focus? Are there some ideas that no one has started, or some areas that you think that are great for blockchain but no one's doing it? Are there any little kernels, nuggets? Point them in the right direction.
Yeah, let me think about what's so. It's a funny and challenging question, because if I come up with something good, I'll kick myself for not having started it already. So so you're challenging me. But I'd like to come up with something that's completely novel, because I would love to have more people helping pull in this space in different directions. I would say looking at the context that we're in now around techlash and the regulatory social frustrations that we have with the model that we've been living in for the past, pick your time frame, right? Where you win, companies win if they accumulate the most data to then be able to drive the biggest analytics across the widest population to then be able to offer clever services. Is a blunt instrument, and obviously riddled with problems in that it's derivative data that no one's approved them to have, and we didn't even know you had it. And this is the whole notion of you didn't read the fine enough print on the thing you signed up for, and now they have the ability to resell your data to someone who resells it to someone else, and your data is everywhere else except for in your control and your purview. That period is over. Right, or is it? We're at the beginning of the end of that, socially, legislatively. It's and even driven by our nation state to nation state dynamics around confidentiality and data, et cetera. So against that backdrop, there's a ton more to do around user control of data, Sir Tim Berners-Lee we were just with him this week as well, talking about Solid and and his whole notion of personal data stores as the next evolution of how the internet is going to develop. Our work around digital identity, around user-controlled identity through the DIF or ID 2020. So I'm getting to it slowly. Sorry. So the identity space is the white hot frontier of we've really not changed our whole notion of how we interact with our financial systems, education systems, retail systems around identity. We're stuck. We're doing it the same way we've largely been doing it for thousands of years. What can you pull out of your pocket, prove who you are, and let's execute the transaction off of me looking at a piece of paper or something, a credential you show me online. This whole space is ripe. My personal view is there's a vast amount of new innovation in how do we actually enable user control over their own identity. There's great work that's started on it, and there's a solution pattern that has emerged. But the business value, where I think there's real space for the business value, is thinking about all the current work that's being done to give us all our own identity wallet and our own user control over what we share with authorities and service providers. What could you build off of that? Right. So this is the nugget of the idea of I would encourage some students to think about, if an individual was empowered, if entire collections, nations, populations are enabled with a digital identity, what business model could you change around it? And I'll give one more descriptor, and then see if I can make this any more specific. We've just launched something called Circular Supply Chain with, we built a working prototype, and then we've now partnered and invited AWS, MasterCard, Mercy Corps, and Everledger to join in with us to see how we implement it, which is basically taking all of the track and trace supply chain stuff that's out in the media and you can read lots about, which is fantastic, right? Can we provide that provenance of a good that goes through a supply chain? What we did was we said, great, now that exists, and actually, so what I'm doing here is modeling the thought pattern I would encourage your students to have, is we said, now that capability of track and trace exists, what could we do with that to actually drive a different problem or a more fun, a more basic part of the problem? And the problem space that we were thinking about was we all want to see fewer rainforests cut down, no slave labor, no child labor. We're all trying to drive behavioral changes at the beginning of supply chains. The people pulling stuff out of the earth or sewing it together for the first time, or the smallholder producers that are at the beginning of the supply chains. We've never been able to actually get the money that comes out of the end of the supply chain back to those individuals at the beginning to actually change incentives and the dynamics to change behaviors effectively. We count on the money going back through each one of the intermediaries, and that just never worked. So what we said was, actually, what if we change the business model? And through the use of this technology, we directly connected end consumers back to those original producers. Any one of us standing in the Whole Foods grocery aisle, we could see a placard of the farmer that's doing the right thing with their family next to them, and we could, through any variety of mechanisms, right, through an app, see the provenance, trace all the way back to that farmer, see the accreditations of their behavior, appreciate it, and send a tip to them directly. A small tip from us directly to that farmer that doesn't have to go through the whole chain, is net new money into the system. It's directly linking consumers and producers, which then has a rich set of data to drive good things on both ends, and the microeconomic impact on those farming communities or the sowers or the growers, et cetera, is going to be, we think, is going to be huge. And so this is taking an enabling thing, building on it, and dumping the business model on its head to try to drive real change.
So you're talking financial tip.
Yeah. So, yeah. Money. Exactly. Because at the end of the day, that's what's actually going to drive behavioral change, right? In many cases, these smallholder producers are trying to survive, right? So if you look at the gemstone mining in Madagascar, like they know they're cutting down the national forest, and they're doing things that they know are not right. They're trying to survive, and we can't blame them for that, right? They literally, if it's life and death, they're going to choose life, and they may do something that's not great for the environment. If we actually connect consumers and pay and provide value, financial money to them to be able to then not worry about survival, but worry about sustainable, then we actually drive real change. So that's the kind of thing of, I think there's the opportunity, and this is incredibly long-winded, and I apologize for
I love it. This is great.
What I would love to see a couple of your students think about is, take it as a given that we achieve the user-controlled digital identity. Now, what could you do with that? Following the thought process that we just followed around the notion of circular supply chain. That would be a white hot space, I think, because I think identity is at the heart of every business flow. It's at the heart of every interaction, and there's going to be a lot more creativity that can be applied when we're all carrying around with us our rich set of identity information in our own wallets and in our control.
I think that's great, and we can actually do a lot with that. I appreciate it. And as a thank you for that, if you ever have some thought seeds and you want some of our students to maybe run with it and dig into it, see if there's something there, give us a call, and we're happy to.
I would love that. Let's do it. Actually, there's a couple of provisional patents that I've filed right now that that would be kind of fun to get some additional thought horsepower behind. So let's do it.
Patent it first. That will help you with it. But yeah, David, we really appreciate the generosity of your time, and the insights you gave us were wonderful. And we hope that we can take some of your projects further down the road with you.
Excellent. Well, I looking forward to engaging you with you and the students more. Would love that. So thanks for the time.
Okay. Thank you, David. And we'll see you next time.
Take care.
Take care.